I think it's always good to have an origin story. And I think mine's not that different than a lot of people that stumble into manufacturing. I say on one level that I stumbled in, but in reality, I had one of my closest friends growing up. His dad was had multiple engineering degrees and worked at this company that builds jet engine parts. And he was one of the original five guys, and he had built an amazing machine shop in his garage. And so I ended up being at my friend's house on a consistent basis, and he was always making parts for his dad, and he had started early on, you know, I mean, in his early teens. And back in the days when I was riding my BMX bike over to his house to hang out, he'd be whittling away on parts. And I saw that this amazing opportunity because this dude always had money, which I didn't. And I remember one of the things that I learned from my dad was he was talking about the trades. And, this was a conversation many years earlier when my brother asked about college path and all of that. And I remember my dad said, you could choose to do what you want to do, but I would highly recommend at some level, if you always want to be able to earn a wage and feed your family, then you should develop skills in the trades. And that stuck with me literally all these years. And I've used that phrase and I've taught that thing so many times to people because, especially in the world we live in today, there's this huge separation. And I think there's always been, but with the value of what the current education system is doing or not doing. But it's kind of like a weeding process, it's designed to be in the format that it's in, and it serves a purpose. But it definitely forces identity on people, whether we like it or not. And one of the things that I discovered, as a very young person with ADD, OCD, dyslexia, I mean, I had it all of these, what we really kind of deem as entrepreneurial traits these days, that I found that in the manufacturing space, there was room for everybody of all different styles and shapes and education levels. And of course, I learned much later. But you see, when I was really young and I didn't get along real well with the education model, I remember getting in trouble again for being disruptive in class. And, I was never malicious. I was always just kind of poking fun and trying to class clown and staring out the window and, you know, basically being disruptive. And, you get sent to the principal's office again. And my dad just happened to be in town because he was a long haul trucker and he just had one truck, a small business. And then they eventually had three, but he was just happened to be in town. My mom was like, "Hey, you're taking this one," meaning that she's gone to the elementary school plenty of times and with me and, different principal, counselor, teachers, kind of trying to figure out what to do with me. And, some of these deep moments that really set your life on a course. And I remember my dad, um, sitting in the principal's office. I was in second grade, Mrs. Jarrett's class, and whatever I was doing, being disruptive again. And my dad, as they're trying to describe what I'm doing and what's going on and so forth, I'm got all this energy and, not paying attention and being disruptive and all that. And I'm watching the principal describe this to my dad, and I'm watching my dad respond, and I'm looking at his face, and he's kind of like, "Yeah, huh, huh, huh. So what's the problem?" he says. And the principal, like, "Well, we can't have him being disruptive in class because it's affecting the other kids and blah, blah, blah," which I'm sure was true. But my dad's like, "Does he understand the material?" "Yes." "Seems to test okay." "Does he get his homework done?" "Yeah, ish." It sounds like this is an entertainment problem because they wanted to, back in those days, we didn't really know what the hell it was. And now we're pretty clear on the ADHD model. But they were suggesting for me to be put on some type of medications back then. My dad's like, "We're not putting this kid on medications." And then they wanted to put me in the special ed class. My dad's like, "You're not putting him in special ed class. There's nothing wrong with this kid. You got to figure out a way to entertain him." That moment that my dad stood up for me was one of these pivotal moments because I was able to stay in normal classes. My dad's like, "I was probably even way worse than you were as a kid." I'm laughing because I remember all the times I went to my son's elementary school and sat with the principal or the teachers, and you just going, "Yeah, yeah, I get it, I get it." Fortunately, they're a little more, lenient in this era. But that I just remember my dad saying, like, "You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be okay. The education system is what it is. Just try hard, work hard, have fun doing it." And even though I had to struggle with the way that I was learning in that world, it it definitely prepared me for, what was about to come, which was, being introduced to, or this particular friend of mine being introduced to like the manufacturing industry. I see my dad was always like a woodworker guy, had a little, built a little shop on the back of the garage and had a woodworking shop, masterful like cabinet builder doing woodworking. So I got my hands really dirty a lot in those days because I was building like speaker boxes and things that I could figure out how to build. And so I had that deep knowledge early on of using all kinds of different power tools and cutting tools. And it was just something that just came super easy to me. I could just see it in my mind. And then my dad saying that quote about, learning the trades and you'll always be able to take care of yourself was certainly a pivotal moment. But what it did is it, especially coming right out of high school, is like I already knew what I wanted to do. I already knew, even though I was planning on becoming a mechanical engineer and I had taken all the classes in high school. The mission at the time was to play football, ideally at the University of Washington, and go to mechanical engineering school at UW. And of course, I wasn't necessarily probably good enough, but I, had injuries and so forth. So the football career was kind of over quickly. But I had gone to pre-college, trips up to the U, asking about engineering and so forth. And, I was one of these kids where I was like, "Excuse me, professor, what do engineers make? Like, how much money?" And he was thinking like, "Well, you make everything." And I was like, "No, no, no. Like, how much money do you make as an engineer?" And they told me back then. And I'm just thinking like, well, that's not going to get me my jet and house on the water. And, I had big dreams back then. But, it's easy to look back now. You could just see the course kind of plotted out. But the manufacturing world was designed for people like me. You could learn at a significant pace. You could have exceptional growth in an organization, especially if you're in the right tool and die shops and now, smaller production shops, and I call them labs, because you're going to be rewarded based on your actual effort and your ability to learn and retain that information and then be able to repeat it consistently. So you're being extremely productive for a manufacturing company. And I started out working in a small tool and die shop, and I started my own company at the same time when I was 19, basically right out of high school. And I was doing a little weld and fab work, and I got my first production welding job working at this little tool and die shop. Was the catalyst that just set me on this path. And my buddy and I had the opportunity to take this shop over from a gentleman that was retiring. I counseled with a number of people and didn't want the friendship partnership thing back then. So I opted just to stay on, train his folks, help him grow that. But I was doing my side thing, which really was a full-time gig. And I was providing tremendous value for his deal while I was building mine. And I just really understood, this idea of, putting the time in. And I remember somebody saying, "How many hours is it, a work year?" And it was like 2,000 hours. And I saw all these people around me that, they were like, "Oh, I've been in this trade for 20 years." And a lot of these union guys at these big shops they've been a machinist for 20 years, but they've been stuck basically running one machine. So they really didn't grow their skill set. They basically just become really good at running that one machine, as opposed to working in small real high-end CNC shops of today, whereas you can, work across all kinds of disciplines. But the beginning, starting out was so critical to have, a handful of people in my life. And I thought that maybe I could get some education that could accelerate this. So I went and signed up for a summer program it was actually a 2-year program, but I signed up for the summer program at Renton Technical College, and it's Renton Vocational back then, but now it's called Renton Technical College. And they had a full manufacturing program, 2-year program. At the same time, I was running my own little side business. I was working part-time at this particular tool and die shop and doing this school thing. I literally completed the entire 2-year curriculum for this vocational program in 6 months. It's probably like 4 months. And so I got, they've never done it before, but I set up almost like a work release program. I could get school credit because I was working in this tool and die shop, learning from these masters. And I could get credit for the school if I kept working there, and I would report back to the school. And I did that for a few months. And eventually I was like, well, I have kind of the dream job. I don't know what this piece of paper is going to get me any further. And so I just stopped doing the reporting in. But that was an interesting model because it led me to building a relationship with one of the professors, if you will, at the vocational school. So I got to tap into him and other people. And so it was sort of a hiring model that we developed as well. But to get back to the beginning, like starting in manufacturing, I found that it was the perfect place for people that are wired like me. And sometimes it's hard to discern or describe, maybe a better way to put it, how I'm wired. And I think in a nutshell, I see things in images and pictures and really understand formulaic models. And so graphs and charts and things of that nature are really a way that people that are wired like me can communicate effectively. I did really well with two-dimensional blueprint like drawings. And of course, when the whole computer-aided manufacturing, the CAD/CAM, computer-aided drafting and computer-aided manufacturing started coming in heavily, wireframe, and then into solid models, all that stuff just came super easy to me because that's just how my brain is wired. And so as the technology came on, I had a mentor working at this little tool and die shop that he ran the floor for many years before I got there. And he had just come back from a horrible motorcycle accident that basically was riding a Harley on this river road, and he crashed the Harley on top of him, broke his back, and couldn't walk, was paralyzed below the waist. And so he came back to the shop in a wheelchair, and that guy became my mentor because I essentially worked out a deal with the ownership that we could run like a second shift. If Doug, this guy in a wheelchair, could be my mentor, I would be his hands at the machines. And so I got on this accelerated learning curve with this amazing mentor. And I could see how quickly, when you have somebody that's just pouring everything they know into you and getting a really good understanding about the different machines and how they function, it was an unbelievable opportunity. But he gave me this gift of this quote. And he said, if you treat this industry, meaning manufacturing, like you invested $100,000 to go to Harvard or Yale, which again, back then, now it's way more than that. But he said, if you invest in this industry as though you invested to go into an Ivy League college for the next 4 years, it will change your life. And, I just believed him. I didn't have any reason not to because the guy poured into me so much, but he was so committed to that idea, is that if you start moving with the technological changes, moving from manual machines to the NC back then to CNC, which is computer numerical controlled machines. So basically robotic controlled machine tools. And I went all in on this manufacturing world. And so if I could and I've told people this, I've told this story hundreds of times around what Doug explained to me about, if you treat this thing like you invested, multiple six figures in an Ivy League education, that it will take care of you at a very high level for the rest of your life. And so I think if it could get anybody to really understand why manufacturing was so exciting and important to me, is that there's so much opportunity. It's this unknown industry because for the last 40, 50 years in the United States, we haven't taught anybody how to build anything. We've basically, outsourced it, offshored it forever. And I would say if anybody's looking for the next big wave of investing, the next big thing is going to be reshoring manufacturing, and hope people take it as seriously as I did from an early age, because it has definitely taken very good care of me and my family and hundreds of other people along the way that have either worked for us or still work for us in our organizations. So it's an amazing opportunity out there for people if they could just see what's available.